Welcome, everyone, to the Insurance Prospectors podcast. On today's show, we have Bradley Flowers. Bradley is the founder of Portal Insurance, a scratch independent insurance agency based in Mobile, Alabama. His insurance journey began back in 2011 as an independent agent for Liberty National Life Insurance Company, and after a stint at State Farm and Alpha Insurance, Bradley opened Portal in March 2019. In that same year, Portal Insurance was named Agency for the Future by Safeco Insurance for the Southeast United States. He is an acclaimed speaker in the insurance and real estate sector and is the co-host of our favorite insurance podcast, Insurance Guys Podcast, the most downloaded podcast in the insurance industry. Through his podcast, Bradley and his co-host Scott Howell, friend of the show, have interviewed hundreds of influential individuals, including Gary Vee, Dave Meltzer, and Jesse Cole. Bradley's social media presence is second to none in the industry, offering fantastic content on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, amassing over 25,000 followers across all platforms. Thank you, Bradley, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time. My script here says, say something else genuine about how much you appreciate him, which I did not need prompting to do because I had the pleasure of meeting you once. I think we've met a few times, but the one that stands out in my mind is we met in Chicago at an Insurance Agency Owners Association Conference, IAOA, as we like to say around here, EIEIO. It's a Paul Hawkins ism. But you were like hot on the end of a speaking tour, and you were consciously winding down that process because you were like, I want to focus on family, I want to focus on the agency. And we had this maybe 5-minute super genuine conversation, and we had just met, but you were completely honest and open book with me, and that's how I feel like you embrace every conversation that I've ever seen you have in the industry. So I am genuinely happy and humbled that you would join us on this conversation today.
Thanks, Kenny. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've met you a few times. I know one time I met your cardboard cutout at the HawkSoft headquarters.
Sure.
Yeah, that was my last speaking engagement, and I think that was about a year ago. And I have the next one is this week, tomorrow actually.
Oh, wow.
So I'm doing one this year, and that's tomorrow. Mostly just to stay sharp.
Yeah.
But I had to get off the road. It was just. I think I've traveled every month out of the year last year. So, But I appreciate it. Also appreciate you adding up all the followers I have across the platforms. I've never done that. So thank you.
That was our producer, Jeff, who is the best researcher in the business.
I believe it.
So I'm super excited to have you on here because I have followed Portal since 2019, since you hit the market. It's always been my responsibility at HawkSoft to keep an eye on forward-thinking agencies, and Portal Insurance really hit the ground as like, hey, we're thinking about the things from a contemporary viewpoint. We're not letting the way the industry has always worked dictate how we're going to work. And so I think that makes you a perfect guest to land this insurance technology influencer series on. I'm going to start with just an absolute easy question. What technology stands out to you today? What is like grabbing your attention in the insurtech world?
There's a couple. I'll give you two. So there's one that I'm probably not supposed to talk about yet, but I'm going to do it anyway. One is already out there. The other one is emerging. So the first one that comes to mind is a technology that we're using every single day called Gaia, Gaya. That is essentially a replacement for a rater is the best way to describe it, but it's carrier agnostic. So a couple years ago, we actually set out to build our own comparative rater because the part of the world I'm in, raters don't work with our carriers on personal lines. And so we hired a dev team who was a phenomenal dev team and did a great job. They built exactly what we wanted them to build, and was really proud of it. And it cost us, I think it cost me $30,000 and it cost the developer $100. because he underbid the job. But,
Mm.
kudos to those guys for sticking to what they quoted us. But it just ended up being a larger endeavor that neither one of us knew it was going to be. And we actually sunsetted that this year, even though it was
Mm.
a functional product. It was my baby. I was in love with it. There were some really cool things in it that other raters don't do. And it's still functional in case anybody wants to buy it from me. But we sunsetted that in favor of
Hmm.
Gaia because Gaia was just so good. So that's one that I think, not only for rating but for servicing policies and policy changes endorsements. There's another one that doesn't have a name yet. That is a technology that I'm a part of, small part of, and my team is helping develop, that is using artificial intelligence to, in short, make carriers that don't download to Ivans download.
Mm. Mm.
So it either connects directly with the carrier or through a document parsing,
Sure.
and will take like ENS policies and some of these insurtechs that don't download. It'll take their policies and put them into your AMS. So those are two that I think I'm the most excited about right now.
Yeah. Um, I've known the team at Gaia since before they graduated Stanford. They came to us. Jean Pierre and his partner approached us when they had their initial the initial build out for what became Gaia.ai,
Yep.
which I thought was like a really novel business approach. They started out focused on auto insurance and making sure that people were getting access to like competitive and non-predatory loans, but they were so on the cutting edge of technology that as they saw the wave coming from AI, they made some really intelligent pivots, and it's really cool to see how far they've come, and it's just a good set of people behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, so my presentation I'm giving tomorrow is on InsurTech and and how to use InsurTech in your agency and that sort of thing. And there's one North Star that we go by in our agency when deciding whether we use an InsurTech or not. And it is, does this cause less multiple entries, the same or more? And if it's the same or more, we don't use it.
Mm.
And I think if anybody could take one thing away from looking at any types of InsurTech, it's searching out technology that saves your team time in terms of entry. And because so many agents, and I'm sure you've seen this, like so many agents get shiny object syndrome and they want to hop on the latest and greatest trend. But if it becomes like a whack-a-mole situation where you're solving one problem here, but you're creating another one over here, it's a
Yeah.
net. You might as well keep doing what you're doing because as your agency grows, it's so hard to implement new technology
Hmm.
and get everybody on board and all that sort of stuff. So
That sets me up really well because I would love to know what is the technology stack at Portal Insurance today?
So, um, so we use Risk Advisor. All new customers go into Risk Advisor.
Hmm.
Hats off to David. I'm all for agent built tech. As I've gotten a little bit more tenured in owning this agency, this agency is now bigger than any agency anybody who's worked here has worked in.
Yeah.
So there's unique challenges in that. We're sort of figuring it out as we go. I think the more I've been around super successful people like Gary Vee or different folks, you realize that everybody's kind of winging it a little bit. So it makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. But as I've gotten older, my stance on Risk Advisor always was, hey, well, I'll just build my own form. Well,
Hmm.
now that I've gotten a little bit more tenured, I'm like, I'd rather just pay somebody to do it than build my own because then I don't have the responsibility of making sure it works, And so we ditched our intake form for Risk Advisor. So really big fan of David, really big fan of Risk Advisor. From there, the customer flow goes into Agency Zoom. 90% of what we do on the sales and the service side is inside Agency Zoom. Our AMS is now certs. We
Hmm.
use Gaia for rating. We use Ascend for all of our back end processes as far as like bookkeeping goes, making sure carriers are paid. We're heavy E&S, so that's very important. So the money never touches my account.
Yeah.
It saves me a headache and the liability of having to make sure that premiums in trust correctly and all that sort of stuff. We use a technology called Parsure for our quote proposals.
Okay.
So Parsure, you take the quote, you upload it into Parsure. It uses AI to read the document, pulls off all of the coverages, and then puts them on our quote form. That's one I'm really proud of.
Oh, cool.
We sort of helped the guy that owns that develop it, and it's a side project for him. Our phone system is Lightspeed Voice. We are utilizing the Lightspeed Voice. They have a new AI feature where phone calls are transcribed and then summarized and then placed into the customer file.
Nice.
So my team, they don't have to take notes anymore. And if I have, somebody that's on 50 phone calls a day and it takes them 3 minutes to take a note, I've just saved them however many minutes of time that is.
Yeah.
It also assigns a sentiment to it, positive, negative, or neutral. All the negative calls go into a Slack channel that myself and my managers have access to.
Yeah.
So immediately we know, it literally, Kenny, within 2 minutes of us turning that feature on, we caught something where somebody said something wrong and we're able to correct it. And then there's a few more I'm forgetting, but that's sort of the core of our tech stack.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate just the straightforward nature of exploring that. So many good companies in that list. Huge fans of all of them. Pretty sure everyone you mentioned, except for Parshore, which I wrote down and I'm going to seek out right after this, are partners with HawkSoft. So HawkSoft agencies listening, a lot of the same functionality is possible. Lightspeed has been an amazing partner in their introduction. I think we're in a very interesting moment in the tech space where we're going back to acronyms as names. So I believe Lightspeed's new AI tool is called Nova, if I have my facts correct, which is an acronym for something. But it's, by all accounts, every agency I've talked to that's been using it has been talking about how useful it is.
And if you're not on Lightspeed with the AI stuff, because I'm not necessarily tied to Lightspeed, if you're on a different phone system, you can actually build that yourself as well. Lightspeed just built it for you using combination of like Zapier and ChatGPT and that sort of thing. Totally. So most phone systems you could figure that out yourself.
You're very hands-on in the technology or agency. How much time are you dedicating to kind of exploring technology, building it out of your agency versus more like account activity or management of your team? Like, what is if you had to divide it up into a fraction or a percentage, how much of your time working on the agency is spent on the technology side?
Almost zero.
Wow. Okay.
You may or may not be familiar with EOS and the book Traction. I know a lot of agents, EOS is huge in the insurance space, and part of what EOS teaches is every company needs you have the integrator and the leader. That's not what they call it, but you have the leader and the visionary. It's visionary and integrator.
Okay.
I'm the visionary, and then my director of operations is the integrator. So he's over technology. So almost 100% of the technology decisions I sign off on, or I might come up with the idea, but he does 99% of everything else, even down to he'll sit in on the demos with the company and then give me a summary of like, hey, here's what this is, and this is so almost zero, to be completely honest with you. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about me is that I'm a tech savvy guy. I'm actually not. I just surround myself with people who are.
Okay.
And people who know how to do things. So
So then
because here's the thing. If I was trying to do it all myself, I'd work myself to death.
Sure. So I'm curious then, because Portal, you're 5 years this year. In 2019, did you start with a director of operations? Did you come into the agency saying this is going to be my vision of the structure, or how did you grow to that point?
So we no, we didn't necessarily start with that vision. I hired Kenneth in 2020, and he was working. I told him, I was like, "Hey, go get your license, and then come back to me." And I didn't have the money to hire him, and I was thinking it's going to take him 2 months to get his license. By then, I might be able to hire him. He calls me back 5 days later. He's like, "Hey, I got my license." And I was like, "No, you don't. You passed the pre-licensing test. Everybody thinks that." He's like, "No, I did that too." He's like, "But I stayed up 48 hours straight and studied and drove 6 hours to this other town because I hear that they have an easier test. And I've got my license. When can I start, boss?" And I'm
Wow.
like, "Be at the office on Monday." So he gets to the office on Monday. I was like, "Look, I don't have any money to hire you." I think my wife actually pushed me to do it. And I was like, "I can pay you $150 a week and you can work 2 days a week."
Hmm.
So he worked one day and he was like, "Hey, can I talk to you?" I was like, "Okay, here we go." He decided he wanted to do this. So he comes to me, he's like, "Hey, is it okay if I work all 5 days and you just pay me for two?" And I was like, "Why don't I just pay you for all 5 days?"
Hmm.
And so then I was like, "Sally, you're fired." I'm kidding, I didn't do that. But I was like, I'll figure it out. And
Yeah.
so that's how he started. So he just showed that, and I've got several people like that. Natasha was like that as well. It's just several people that just showed that like they're willing to go above and beyond for the
Yeah.
company. And so we sort of just developed into it. And then 2 or 3 years ago, it got to where I just had so much on my plate running the business that I needed somebody to sort of be like that chief of staff to
Hmm.
basically, so essentially, until this year, we changed his role up a little bit this year, but until this year, his role was basically that of what most agency owners do in a normal agency, which then
Sure.
freed me up so that I could really focus on scaling and looking at the constraints of the business and that sort of thing. So no, it
Yeah.
wasn't, but I tell every agency now, especially if they're in that like 2 to 3 million startup range, they need to be looking towards hiring someone as like director of operations, COO, chief of staff, something like that, to take sort of the higher level but minute tasks off of their plate.
Okay, let me ask you this question then, because this is opening a door to me, and I apologize. We're way off script. One of the things that this is kind of making me think about is, um, so let's envision that agency that is they want to grow. They're a scratch agency. They've hit the 2 to 3 million premium level. Um, from your perspective, is it a better investment to find a person that can function in that operation role, or to find technology that would take on the burden of that same, like streamlining processes or automating things like?
Yeah, I think you can do both.
Hmm.
Our agency is a little bit unique because we're predominantly ENS. So it's a little harder from a technology standpoint. There's a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
manual stuff. I think you can do both, and I think it just depends on the agency. I think one mistake a lot of smaller agencies make is using too much technology.
Hmm.
Certainly, we have been guilty of that. Now, when we started, and I tell new agencies this, like we started with almost no technology. I had a management system, a phone system, and an e-signature platform. That was it. That was it. I was like, I'm going to save all the customer experience, rah-rah, like extra stuff until we're profitable.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And certainly hiring that director of operations role, you are less profitable when you do that.
Hmm.
Same as if you hire a producer and the producer selling insurance that normally you as the agency owner would sell, where you get 100% commission and you're sacrificing a percentage of it. But it all just depends on what you want. You know what I mean? My thing is I was okay with being a little less profitable that in the short term, but really setting ourselves. Our thing is like we
Yeah.
operated and still operate like we're a huge agency, even though we're not,
Hmm. Yeah.
because it makes it easier. Most agencies in the United States of America, like the average independent agency in the United States of America, is $1 million in revenue,
Hmm.
700 to a million in revenue. And most of them get stuck there because that's the point where you need to start building SOPs and have
Mm-hmm.
layers to your management team, and the agency owner can't be the one that everybody reports to. And most people, and that's the point where the agency owner can no longer be the top producer. And
Sure.
most people are either scared or don't necessarily have the wherewithal to make those changes. And that's why people get stuck there. I think you can overdo it with technology, though. I think you have to be careful. I think you do a blend of both. I think you have a person and then you have a little bit of technology to aid that person.
So would you say that if someone is really they're stuck in that spot, that's 700 to $1 million revenue, and they feel like it's been a year, it's been 2 years, they've been at that level. Um, I guess and this is a loaded question, is technology going to unstick them, or is people and process going to unstick them? Like, if you had to put your money on one of those.
So my friend Jeff Roy had a brilliant quote on Instagram of all places last week. And as soon as he said it, I said, dang it, I wish I'd have thought of that. And I immediately messaged him and told him I was stealing it. He said, technology applied to inefficient processes only enhances the inefficiency.
Hell yeah.
So I think you have to have the processes first, because if you don't have a process, how is this technology going to help you? I
Yeah.
think you have to have the SOPs, the standard operating procedures of how we're going to do these things, and then you add the technology in the gaps.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do it the other way. And what I tell every agency owner to do, and I don't know what this thing is called, but it's a matrix. It's a big plus sign. And in this quadrant, you have I think it's called the delegation or efficiency quadrant. In this one, you have things you're good at that you like doing.
Mm.
This one is things you're good at that you don't like doing. Things you like doing that you're not good at, and things you don't like doing that you're not good at. You
Yeah.
eliminate that one first. The next thing you eliminate is the things you like doing that you're not good at, which is the hardest one to do. Usually that's the technology piece for agency owners.
Sure.
The next thing is the second one I said, and then that leaves you with the things you like doing that you're good at.
Yeah.
And look at eliminating those three, either with people or with technology. And by the way, I've seen the other side of it too. You know, we acquired an agency in January that had no technology whatsoever, not even an AMS. They were operating the whole agency off an Excel spreadsheet. This agency, and had no SOPs. This agency owner's solution to problems that arose was just hiring more people. So it was an
Okay.
agency that had 9 people that we are now running on 3, and we're probably overstaffed by 1. So
Wow.
as an agency that had
Yeah.
9 employees that could have gotten by with 2. So he would just throw bodies at the problem, and that leads to more issues as well.
Totally. I appreciate that perspective so much. Listeners are going to say like, well, yeah, Kenny's getting on his soapbox about process over technology again. That quote is awesome. I'm going to go seek it out on Instagram right after this. And
It was actually a comment. He didn't even
oh,
post
wow.
it on it. It was in a comment of a post. So I'm like, this is like really profound,
Yeah.
honestly.
That's like the thesis of a book. It's like, that's,
Yeah, exactly.
um, okay. I do want to give listeners kind of the thing they probably tuned in for. And you gave us a tech stack, which I love. My question for you, I let me paint a vision of like an agency, because
Okay.
I think that I think if you try to sit the fence on what I'm about to describe, you're going to just be stagnant. And so I think there are agencies that um, want to grow in a slow, methodical way, because they're comfortable and they're like, okay, I'm going to do referral based growth. It's going to be intentionally slow. I'm going to take my time with this. And then I think there are other agencies that are, I want to go fast. I want to acquire new
Mm-hmm.
business as quickly as possible. I want to do a good job with it, but I also want to be in that aggressive growth mode. If you were speaking to someone that was looking at the growth mode side, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm young, I have energy, I want to be dedicating hours to this, I want to be focused, and I want to build my empire, I want to build my agency. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think is the first piece of technology they should implement? Let's say they have the processes in place, they have the people in place. What is that first piece of
Yeah.
technology they should really be seeking out?
It's going to sound like you told me to answer this, but I think a management system that is set up properly.
Okay.
I think that most people use AMSs. Most of them don't have them set up correctly in terms of
Mm.
like having your producers in there and having the commission rules and having all of your carriers in there if it's an MGA and making sure the data is right.
Yeah,
The old saying of garbage in, garbage out. If
totally.
your data is correct and everything is set up and you are using, they say we only use like 60% of our brain. I think people only use like 20% of their AMSs, right? If you're using 80 to 90% of the features of that AMS and really using it, not only are you going to be able to scale faster and sell more, but your agency is going to be worth more.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like the agency that we bought that had no data whatsoever, like I would have paid more.
Yeah,
And I'm a private buyer. I'm not PE or big, firms. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So that's what I would say, man. Like get your AMS together, get everything in line. That way you can really put the pedal to the metal because here's what happens when you start an agency. Selling new policies solves all your problems.
mm-hmm.
100% of your problems. The longer you're in business, the more that changes
Yeah,
and new policies add problems.
sure.
Because if we write a $400,000 trucking account or even a personal lines policy, like I now have to have the processes and the ability to service that and make sure my customer gets what we promised them and all that sort of stuff. So getting all of that in line, and that really goes back to the last or the previous question where we talked about SOPs versus technology, like putting all of that in place so that you can put the hammer down. It's like
Hmm.
trying to drag race your car and you don't make sure you have gas in it or the oil's not
Yeah,
changed. Like eventually you're going to lose,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And I
So,
think that is, eventually if you have the mindset of I'm going to grow this business as quickly as I can, or I'm going to make use of my stamina right now to carve out my territory and get a big chunk of it. Um,
hmm
I think it's fair to say that a lot of those agency owners right now, or maybe not right now, but there's been a lot of like M&A activity going on. So I think it's logical to say that type of
and it's
agency may
about
be
to
thinking
ramp back
about,
up. With interest
yeah.
rates going down, it's about to, yeah.
And so I think if you're that type of agent listening, and it's totally fair to have an exit in mind, to be thinking about, hey, I'm going to do this is my business, I'm going to do it really well, and I'm going to
Yeah.
get value out of it, and I'm going to treat my people well as I exit. Um, the a company acquiring that agency is going to look at an Excel spreadsheet and be like, how do I trust this?
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
if you're looking at the database and the in-depth details on every action taken and like a quick report that you can produce in 5 minutes saying like
Yeah.
this is my book of business, I think that's going to go a long way to impress people and get you a
hmm
better leverage, better position to have that conversation.
Well, and I'm acquiring agencies. We bought one this year. I've probably looked at 50 before we bought that one, and I've probably looked at 20 or 25 this year. Carrie Wallace acts as my fractional CFO. She helps with these acquisitions. I texted her 2 Fridays ago, and I said, in the first time in the history of 2024, does Bradley Flowers not have any agencies he's looking at to buy? And I texted her at 8 a.m. the following Monday and said, I have two. So over a
Yeah.
weekend, I
Yeah.
had two. And some of these folks, man, like I think you should always operate your agent, any business like you're going to sell it because it just
Hmm.
makes it that much bigger, better of a business,
Sure.
right? But it's funny, like some of these guys and gals, like I always reach out when I'm looking at one and I say, okay, send me the P&Ls, carrier reports, balance sheet, income statement, basic stuff that every business owner should have. And I literally had one guy that said, yeah, I don't have any of that crap. He didn't say crap, but I don't have
Sure.
any of that. I'm like, well, and by the way, wanted like a really high multiple.
Hmm.
I'm like, even if that was feasible, like, do you think you might should have this stuff together before you put it on the market? You know what I mean? Or you
Yeah.
have the guy that's like, I had one of these, like one of those two that is maximizing his business for tax purposes. So making the net profit look like it's 10 grand when really it's 100, right? And by the way, I respect whatever, you do you. That's not to say I can't go into the P&L and pull stuff, but then it creates way more work for me, which equals that person not getting as good of an offer from me.
Yeah.
Because there's so much unknown in there. You know what I mean? So like you've got to think about like any investment. You know, me and my wife just bought a rental property this week. We went under contract on a rental property, and it's at the beach. We're going to Airbnb it if anybody wants an Airbnb at the beach. Subtle plug. We bought it with the exit in mind. Like any investor will tell you, like start with the exit strategy, work your way back. And I think you need to look at your agency as an investment and like, okay, let's end with this is what we want to, this is what we would walk away for, and then let's reverse engineer back into the way that we do things. You know what I mean? So that I think it's important to track EBITDA and expenses and revenue per employee as you're growing, even if you have no intention of selling. You know, and by the way, if you track your EBITDA and your EBITDA is really good, it's going to make it easier for you to buy an agency.
Oh, totally. Excellent point. Yeah, because it's almost like you can invert the thought of like, okay, I'm designing this business with the exit in mind. Oh, what is it? How does it advance that plan if I incorporate market share from another business, or what does it accelerate if I find a business that operates the same way as me that makes that merger even easier? That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I would be remiss if we didn't have you hostage here, if I did not take an opportunity to see if we could maybe get some dirt on friend of the show, friend of the industry, Scott Howell, who we had on about 6 weeks ago at this point. In terms of air date, he capped off our series on mental health. We had an amazing conversation while he was on vacation, and since we have you here, I'd love to know if you could give us just maybe one of your favorite Scott stories to send the audience out on.
So if you are listening to this and you don't know Scott, let me describe him to you in one sentence. He is a combination of Macho Man Randy Savage, who he does a phenomenal impression of, by the way. The first One City World Tour conference that Scott and I hosted, we told the audience that he got sick and couldn't come, but we had Macho Man Randy Savage in his place, and he came out dressed up as Macho Man Randy Savage. Combination of Macho Man Randy Savage and Jerry Clower. You guys may not know Jerry Clower. He's a Southern comedian that's hilarious. That's the best way to describe Scott. So my favorite Scott story, I have two. He's going to get mad at both of these probably, but he has this level of don't care that I'm so envious of. So the first time Scott or I ever did a Zoom call, it was 2019, and we had a call with Chris Langiel with Advisor Evolved. I'd love to know if Chris remembered this. And Scott was on his cell phone. Scott's on the road a lot. Scott has 5 agencies that are a good ways apart from each other, and I think he lives like an hour from his main office. So he's on the road a lot. So a lot of his calls that we're on, he takes them in the car. And he didn't realize that it was a Zoom call. He thought it was just a conference call. So he had the phone up to his ear. So the whole time, Langiel and I are looking at his ear hole. The second one is we were at a conference, and Scott does such a great job of making everybody feel like his best friend, whether he knows them or not. So we're at an insurance conference, association event. Scott and I were speakers, and that night we had a dinner with some of the other speakers. And you got to remember, we've done at that point had done 250 episodes of the podcast, and at this point we've done 350, I believe, and I've probably booked 248 of them. You know, so there are people I have relationships with. one of the speakers showed up late and sat down and sat beside Scott. And I knew he knew that we had interviewed this person, but he probably did, face to a name kind of thing. And he's like, "Hey, how are you? So good to see you." And then he turns to me and goes, "Who is that?" Like without missing a beat. And it was just so like quintessential Scott. Like, and by the way, I've been in that shoe too, where I'm
100%.
like, I see people at these insurance and everybody, "Hey, Bradley," and I'm like, I have no idea who this person is. But yeah, I love the guy, man. Like, he's my best friend. Like, he's the best thing that ever happened to the podcast. I would go to war with that guy. He's the guy I share almost all of my secrets with, next to my wife, and we're in the foxhole together, man. And I think that's one thing that makes our podcast relate to people, is like we're in it every single day. Like, Scott shares stuff on the podcast that I will never share. He had an employee that stole $150,000 from him, and the next day did a podcast on it. Yeah. I'm like, dude, I don't know that I have the willingness to be that honest to people, but he is.
Yeah. And that's honestly why we asked him that story, and also just how he is as a person relating to people, is why we asked him to be the capstone on our series on mental health. We'll have a link in the description below. Because, he is such an open book. And the reason why we wanted you to cap off this one is because you are an active agency owner who is well respected in the space, and people tune in and listen, because I think you do have an extremely valid perspective, and I am grateful that you shared it with our listeners here today. Like I said, grateful for your time, grateful for the conversation we've had. Thank you so much, Bradley, for being on the episode. We'll have links to your show and where to find you. We'll have links to Portal Insurance and all the other great stuff down below. Thank you for watching today's episode. Click the video description below to learn more about our guests and to view the latest podcast episode, as well as other content from HawkSoft. We appreciate you watching and hope you join us next time on the Insurance Perspectives podcast. Thank you.